My name is Signa Domshanks. I am very grateful. I get paid by this law school to work here, and I'm a new professor here. And some of you I've already met, but some of you I haven't met yet, so it's great to have you all here, and I look forward to crossing paths with you some other time in the near and distant future in this building. I'm here, and I'm very privileged to introduce our speaker today. I have a feeling she'll also be wanting you to speak, and I hope you feel comfortable in speaking up too. So maybe we'll all be speakers by the end of the session. First of all, I'd like to do something, and what I'm doing maybe might get to another topic too about how we decide we're going to be ourselves in this building, and have gratitude and gratefulness and good energy while we're here, and how we do that at work as well too. So I'm going to present Marilyn Poitras with some tobacco, and I'll just sort of explain it a little bit. The way I've been taught by about some of my family traditions is you say thank you to knowledge keepers even before they start, because you want to say you're very grateful for all the information they have, and what they choose to do with that information is up to them. So there's no conditions on that knowledge. Just you're happy to know them and to get to know them, and that they'd feel welcome and feel like meeting you in whatever circle you are. So because I'm from out west and I'm Métis, I've been taught to present tobacco, because tobacco is a very valuable product or item to have, and that I present it in red cloth because red is also very valuable. It's not a common dye color in the prairies, and that I also tie it together with colors that represent directions. And although it might look black from far away, it's a very dark blue. And if you've ever seen the 4 directions color wheel, sort of a more specific one for where I'm from would be to have the color blue, so that you know where I'm from. So it's sort of one of the most valuable things I can present to someone before as a thank you. So I'd like to give that to Marilyn as a knowledge keeper for us. And then maybe I'll say a few words about Marilyn Poitras. Marilyn Poitras is a professor at the University of Saskatchewan's College of Law. She's from the prairies as well too, from an area in the middle of Saskatchewan. And Marilyn Poitras has done many a thing. I first met Marilyn, I think, when I was articling. So that was one stage where she was working in the Constitutional Law Division of Saskatchewan Justice. I've also known Marilyn as someone who's worked as a court worker, as an instructor and teaching assistant at the Native Law Center, as a person who helped get off the ground an idea of Indigenous peoples and agriculture, and as a consultant, and as a practitioner, and now as a professor and writer and soon-to-be filmmaker, I think, in some ways, at the University of Saskatchewan. And as I hope I can call her my friend, partly because I think if she's forgiven me for a lot of things, and if that's not a sign of friendship, I don't know what is. One of the areas that Professor Poitras has become really involved with is an area that's now called Law and Happiness. I'm not sure she'll like me making this link to it, but in some circles the phrase law and happiness is considered an area of law and economics, because of some economists deciding they can study altruism. But it's also got the idea of talking about certain subjects that law schools are getting more and more interested in bringing up in the classroom and at work, and thinking about how we as people who decided to get into the legal profession are talking about our own personal groundedness, and how that helps us do the job we'd like to do in circles that talk about the law. And so Marilyn's been doing work all across Canada on this subject, you know, whether it's to the Canadian Bar Association, or with other students, or with different faculties in different locations in Canada, to sort of help people, help her, number one, and then discuss as a larger group what topics are part of this law and happiness area, and what we think we'd like to discuss at the moment, and what thoughts we'd like to have in our head as time progresses. So Marilyn's, we were talking about it, and I think sort of how she'd like to approach this is that there's sort of about 45 minutes where she'd like to sort of talk about the areas that have meant a great deal to her, and I think, and I'm sure she's right on this, these topics will mean a great deal to us, and not that she'd say she's big on the Socratic method, but she might be. No, that's me. She'd love to hear your voices all the time, I bet. So one of Marilyn's greatest gifts is for making people feel at ease, and she always does that for me, and I'm sure she'll do that for you. So take it away.
Hey, thanks. I'm going to stand up, which if I was in a traditional Cree setting would be the height of rudeness, so I'm going to acknowledge that right off the bat. But I have a presentation that I want to kind of follow a bit, or I'll just end up telling you war stories. Okay, hi. Thank you so much for the welcome, for the tobacco. Thank you so much for inviting me to come and talk with you. As Signa mentioned, this Law and Happiness is a class that I developed at the University of Saskatchewan, and I'm thrilled to share it. It's been the best use of my self-help books that you could ever imagine, and so I have a use for some of the tools in my home. Law and Happiness, the title that I pick, is something and that's coming up all over in every corner now for lawyers, judges, law students, and law professors. It's really an important conversation, and I really feel fortunate to actually be in this era and listening to this and participating in this kind of discussion, and it's just time. It's just time that we are open about what's going on and how we're dealing with the issues. It is a class, and I am a teacher, and I think I'm a teacher even when I'm not a teacher, and so I'm just going to treat this like a classroom, okay? And so what happens in my classroom? I'll tell you how I start every single law class that I ever teach. I tell everybody in my law class, the only thing you ever learn about is yourself. And you can do that at law school. You can do that in an agricultural setting, raising beef or chicken. You can do that at Dairy Queen. You can do that in lots of places. You can do that in dentistry, at Dalhousie. You can learn lots of things about yourself, okay? And so what happens is you get substantive material that comes in front of you, and you react or roll or ignore that information. And it pushes buttons, and some of the information stays with you and some of it doesn't. But my bottom line always going into a teaching situation is that I know all I'm ever going to learn about is more about myself. Who I am in the world, who I want to be in the world, who I think I am in the world, and how I participate in the world. The other thing that I do always in my classes, and this is going to be a little complicated, and I won't do it for 5 minutes, but we do a meditation at the beginning of all of my classes. So whether I'm teaching criminal law, Aboriginal law, Law and Happiness, coaching a moot, whatever I'm teaching, we always take 5. And I started doing this in the summer program, and the director of the program said, "You're going to do what?" And I said, "We're just going to take 5. I saw this on a cool website, and I think it would be great." And she was like, "What? They're going to say, what are you doing?" So the first time you do it, you're kind of, you know, you want to kind of make sure nobody's staring at you, and it's a little bit uncomfortable if you've never been in a group meditation before. But I'm going to invite you to play with me right now, okay? So I'd like you to sit up straight in your chairs. And I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'm going to give us a minute or so to just absorb some quiet space. And so I want you to close your eyes and get comfortable. Be completely comfortable in your chair. Put your hands in your lap and just be really comfortable. And I want you to take a breath that I'm going to count for 4. Take a breath in. I want you to hold it for a couple of counts, and then I want you to release it for 7. Okay? Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold for 1, 2, and release 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Keep your eyes closed. And I just want you to do a check-in. I want you to go all the way down to your toes and remember that you have those. I want you to notice if you're hot or you're cold. I want you to realize the noises in the room and whether they're impacting you or you never notice them at all. I want to give you a minute right now. You have full permission to just shut everything off. All the lists, all the things to do, all the should-haves, all the aches and pains, and I want you to just shut the door for a few seconds with me right now on all of that and give yourself permission to just be. Might have some thoughts that are coming to you. I don't want you to ignore them. I want you to think about them like clouds that pass by you. There they are. You're going to keep going and let them come and just gently release. Okay, just open your eyes, take a nice big breath in again. First time I do that with my students, they're kind of like, awkward, what is she doing? And the second time I do it, they're like, okay, we've done this before. And the third time we do it, they expect it and they're waiting for it and they have crazy busy lives and sometimes it's the only 5 minutes they give themselves in the day. And in one class I actually forgot to do it and I was like I had a guest coming, we were really excited and I sort of just skipped right over top of it and a student put her hand up and said, excuse me, like you're taking our 5 minutes away? What happened? And so they're ready for that. They're ready for permission to be still and not have obligations. Okay. It also touches something that we don't talk about as lawyers and law students and legal professionals, and that's the F word, feelings. Feelings are the F word for lawyers, okay? Feeling right down to your body, convincing yourself it's okay to acknowledge something's hurting, something's bugging you, to understand that your body actually sends you a message that I have that stomach ache again. What is that stomach ache? Something's overdue, I'm not prepared enough, there's anxiety in my home, whatever that is. So, and going into that and going, what's that feel like? Like your body's actually trying to say, I get it, we're in a space I don't feel comfortable in again, what are we going to do with that? I have a meditation teacher come in and work with my law and happiness students, and the first time we did a full-on meditation and she went right through the whole body with them, right down down to their toes. And one of the students said, "That is so weird. I've never thought of my body as anything except a vehicle to carry my head around." And I think a lot of people feel that way. Okay, so what am I going to talk to you about today? Law and happiness, of course, the question that I'm asking, so that there truly is an amazing possibility for us to have wonderful careers in the law, okay? And I'm all of the things that I talk about apply to everybody in the world in terms of how to live a good life, make sure you're eating well, all that kind of stuff. But I'm addressing lawyers, law students, judges, and faculty with the information because it's particular to our herd, okay? And so I want to talk about what that means. I'll talk to you about stats and data on this topic, well-being in our profession, details of depression among our ranks, the fact that major depressive disorders, if they're going to occur for law people, starts in law school. And I'm going to tell you also that this is something that's been noted in the literature since the late 60s. So nobody just invented it. This isn't a new phenomena, okay? I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are at our worst: alcoholism, drug abuse, divorce, and suicide. Want to talk about where the happy lawyers are. There are many happy lawyers, okay? And we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about theories of the depression among lawyers. People are writing about this all over the world right now. North America is just purging on this topic right now. I read a piece of data that said in 2000 and before 2013 there were about 50 books on happiness, particularly in the idea of professions, and in something like 3 months, there had been 1,000 articles written on it at the end of 2013. So happiness is popular right now, right? It's the flavor of the month. I'm going to talk to you about the issues within the practice of law that will resonate with what students are going through right now. Long hours, having the answers, being right, no mistakes, carrying the weight of decisions, no training in sort of our emotional development, discussions on what's it like to be wrong, and poor risk analysis. But I'm going to start with how I came up with this topic. The class that I teach is called Law and Happiness, and the title has had a massive impact. I have had more feedback on why happy. That's not really what you mean, is it? You don't mean like happy, like unicorns and rainbows. You mean something substantial like well-being and self-care. Isn't that what you mean? Because we like to have words that feel substantive, that doesn't feel light and fluffy, right? I've had lawyers say to students at the University of Saskatchewan, if a class shows up on your transcript that says law and happiness, you will not get an interview from me. I've had students come and say, I am not taking a class where you're going to meditate. Like, there's nothing worthwhile about my time for that. So this happiness thing is huge. So I'll tell you that my master's degree is actually from Harvard Law School, and that's not something that I usually drop into the conversation, but that's where I got the idea. There was a class at Harvard called Law and Happiness, and I think Cass was teaching it. And so I tried to get into this class, and the waiting list was longer than Santa Claus's list, and I couldn't get in. And so you can imagine, that was in 1994. I have been imagining for this many years, what was he making in there? Like, what did I miss out on, right? So I've got that going on. I also worked in the early 2000s as a director of research for the Reform Commission, First Nations and Métis Justice Reform Commission. So this is right after First Nations men are being dropped outside the city to walk back in and freezing to death, and this is the commission. We got this woman to come and work with us that was studying firefighters and ambulance attendants and post-traumatic stress disorder. And she was talking about when they see these accidents, when they're dealing with this stuff all the time, there's post-traumatic stress disorder, and that's what happens. And I was like, well, of course the police officers have to have the same thing. And there was so much data on police and divorce, like the domestic violence among police officers is off the scale, and their drug and alcohol addictions, like clearly there's a correlation here. And so I did my research there, but then I started thinking, this has to be everybody. It has to be criminal defense lawyers. What about the judges who are sitting in there all the time? Then I start my life at the University of Saskatchewan and publish. Marilyn, you need to publish. Oh, what am I going to write about? And I wanted to write about something that I really cared a lot about. So my expertise is Aboriginal law. That's what I've done for 20 years. That's sort of my background. But I wanted to do something different. So I started Googling, are lawyers happy? Might have had something to do with where I was in my life, but are lawyers happy? Happiness in the law, mental health, well-being. And I came across this website called Cutting Edge Law, and they were doing amazing things. And one of them was a law professor who did this meditation, and she brings in either a photo or a painting or a flower, and she does this stuff. And I was like, okay, I think I'm actually onto something here. Another thing that happened to me when I was in Harvard is I got eczema really bad. And I'd always had eczema as a child, but it covered my whole body and it went into my eyelids. And it was hard to sleep, it was hard to see, it was hard to study. So I went to the doctor for a physical condition and said, I need to talk to somebody. And they sent me in to see the doctor, and he said this and he said that, and check this out. And they said, okay, what school do you go to? And I said, I go to the law school. And he goes, why didn't you tell me that at the beginning? And I was, what does that have to do with my skin condition? Like, who cares what school I go to? He hands me a prescription. He opens the door and he says to his receptionist, she's a law student. And so I go out in my shame to the reception area, and she says, here you go. And she hands me a bunch of brochures. And so I went and sat in the lobby, and they were all brochures on suicide. And I was like, I can't recover from eczema. I should kill myself. What is going on here? And that was the thinking at the time, right? You're a law student. We know that the suicide rates are going to be higher there. And if we'd have known that right off the bat, we'd have sat you down with a counselor so we could deal with your issue. That's what the real issue is. So I have no information about that. Do law students get told that at the beginning? That doesn't come up. It's not in any of the so you want to go to law school books, right? Harvard didn't advertise that on their website. Okay, so I've got enough information behind me. I've got students coming up to me in my first year class saying, Professor Poitras, I'd like to actually be a happy lawyer. I'd like a family. I'd like a partner. Like, how do I do that? I said, are you married? And she said, no. I said, do you have a boyfriend? She said, no. I said, do you have children? And she said, no. I want to get it right now before I bring them in because it doesn't look good. And I thought, I never thought of that. Like, no way. And I started law school very pregnant. Professor Sutherland was one of my teachers when I was in first year. And I started my law school career very pregnant with a 2-year-old. It did not occur to me to make sure everybody was intact. So I've got students coming to me, talking to me about their concerns. And so I've got a great background now to go, there's something going on here. Then I stumbled across some writing by Professor Lawrence Krieger from a university in Florida. And there's brochures he has for first-year students and what you're getting yourself into. And he recognizes a family friend's daughter is in university, and she's social justice, going to change the world. She wants to go and live in other countries. And by Christmas time, all her applications are going out to corporate law. And he's like, what's going on here? So he's been studying and writing about it ever since. So what is it? I'm going to ask you if you can tell me, if you think you know, what the #1 indicator is of whether or not you're doing pretty good. There's some well-being in your life, and life is on a pretty good path. What do you think the #1 indicator is for that? Just for some self-check-in stuff. I'm going to pick on somebody. Sir, take a guess.
Maybe something like getting regular exercise?
That's a good guess. That's an awesome guess, because lots of studies show that if you're getting regular exercise, that's one of the ways you can make yourself happy. Okay? You can keep yourself in well-being. What else? Ladies?
Time to yourself. Time to yourself.
Time to yourself, so some downtime, some meditation time, okay? That's another thing that the science is showing you absolutely have to have. Sir?
Maybe if you're sleeping well?
Sleeping well, absolutely. Sleeping well, getting exercise, getting some downtime. Those are 3 of 5 things that are really important. Social networking. Social networking is the #1 indicator about how well your life is for you, how well that's going. So if I tell you that social networking is the #1 indicator, what do you think the #1 indicator is for things aren't going so well and I need to do a check-in that maybe I need to hook up with somebody? If social networking is the indicator for well-being, what is at the opposite end of that? Yes, ma'am. Isolation. Isolation. And so when you're heading into a depression, a major depressive disorder, you are the last to know that you're headed into that, right? You're just doing your thing and living your life. So what are some of the things to check in and go, is that happening for me? So isolation is absolutely the thing to look for. Okay, I have a caveat on all of the things I'm about to say. And when I speak to lawyers, I always tell them, I know you're all happy and I know you're all doing really well, and this is just for the people in your office that you're going to share this information with later, because I inevitably get people at the end that come and say, I am so happy, I love my job, and I don't know why you think you need to have this conversation with us. And so I'm going to tell you that there are happy people out there, and I know that there are. But there are also psychiatrists and psychologists that are looking at our profession and saying, it could be as much as 52% of the legal profession is suffering from some kind of depression, major depressive disorder. That's a big number, right? That you just can't ignore after a while. So there's good news and bad news that the profession's suffering from a myriad of unflattering isms and illnesses that we prefer actually to think happen with our clients or other people than happen to us. But we're talking about it, we're doing something about it, and we're actually turning our mental health lives around. Now, I'm going to suggest a few things like meditation that we just did throughout my talk today to say, what can you do for yourself? Clearly, major depressive disorders, conditions under the DSM-5, major drug and alcohol addictions are problematic, and you need more than just a deep breath, okay? And I understand that. But I think one of the things we forget is those little things that we do all day long, those little pebbles around that huge boulder that we're going to call major depressive disorders. If you move those little pebbles, the boulder rolls away. And so what are the little pebbles? So I'm going to talk about that stuff. And everything I tell you, you're going to go, yeah, I actually kind of know that. Okay, so this is not news. There's nothing new about what I'm about to say. Okay, so relaxation. Air Canada, please put your own air mask on before helping those around you. What if you had that posted on your bathroom mirror? Please make sure you're good to go before you start going and helping everybody else. I had a time in my life at the University of Saskatchewan where I was dealing with some personal health issues, going through some cancer testing, and became the bit of the fodder for a roast and toast among the first-year law student dinner attendees. And I caved under the pressure in a big way. And when I did and went to speak to the health people at the University of Saskatchewan, she immediately said, I need to know the students that you're actually the go-to person for. And I said, I don't know what that means. Well, professors like you that come to see me have a list this long of students who are dependent on them. And if you're not there, we need to know that they've got somebody else to go to. So that was really interesting to me, right? Are you helping yourself? When I was not feeling well, I was ignoring everything. I would walk to the top of the stairs to go to my office and almost faint. I was ignoring all of that. I was seeing a doctor, they'll figure it out. I don't have time for this. I'm late for class. I didn't enough. I've got 4 students that need to see me after. And so you start to just kind of push your own issues away. So I start my research, and the first thing I learn is, are you looking after yourself? As I worked through the books and articles on our profession and what we can do for ourselves, meditation started to turn up more often than you would think, and it includes a whole host of biochemical and physical changes in your body, collectively referred to as a relaxation response. When activated, this response has a huge impact on your physical body and in particular on your immune system. And so you're going to sleep better, you're going to be able to fight off illnesses better, you're going to have better emotional and physical well-being. No relaxation training in law school as far as I know, or not at the University of Saskatchewan. I'll admit that we're sort of in the middle of the prairies out there, but we don't talk about that. In fact, quite the contrary. We don't talk about the students' personal lives at all. We're very fearful that you'll go get one if we acknowledge that you have one, and so we don't bring that stuff up, right? There's a study done at the medical school in Harvard where a meditation guru went in and said, I'd like to do some work in the field of medicine, and so give me a control, you take a control group and give me some patients to work with, and we'll see if meditation has any impact on them. So they took a group of patients with psoriasis, and half of them just got medicated by the doctor, and the other half were taught to meditate 3 times a week for 3 to 10 minutes, okay? 3 times a week for 3 to 10 minutes. Now, I know people are busy, but you probably have 3 minutes 3 times a week that you could just go and relax, right? In the bathtub, if nothing else, someplace, you could take 3 minutes. The study was overwhelming. The people that had psoriasis that were meditating and doing the medical treatments were improving faster, and their improvements lasted longer than the people who were just in the control group. So there's all kinds of studies about what meditation can do for us. So did you know that meditation in an inner city school had a profound impact on bullying, academics, illness, and attendance in a student body? So it works for every age group. Did you know that an experiment with meditation in a maximum security prison in the USA turned the lives of several men around? Now, this is a maximum security prison where they're not going anywhere, right? They're at the kind of, this is the last stop for them. Stopped escapism in their own lives. They faced the pain they were going through and were prepared to feel what was going on. Did you know British parliamentarians are taking up meditation and posing that it will impact policy, law, and government? Did you know there's been studies on monks, athletes, veterans, soldiers, children, all reporting marked differences in behavior, ability, anger, fear, stress, illness, happiness, even with a very small practice of meditation? Did you know there's a law school, Berkeley, for example, has a mindfulness and law program there. And so it's being introduced in the legal profession more and more. Now, when you start something like a meditation practice, usually you're doing it because you've been diagnosed with something. A family member isn't well, you're not well, there's been a breakdown of some kind. People lose their jobs. You start to have a breakdown before you take your health seriously. And so I guess I want the message to be, don't wait for that. Don't wait for that to happen. And if we can get that message out, if we do some legal education reform, we're going to get that message out earlier rather than later. Okay. When I started to see that this is impacting all of us, I started to think about, it was like I was sort of looking at police officers, and then I started looking at judges and law students and lawyers, and by the time I was kind of out here looking at it, I was really worried about our justice system. I was really worried that the people who are the gatekeepers for our justice system are actually in crisis, and that the crisis within our justice system is just a reflection of the fact that the gatekeepers are having problems. I worked in, Signa talked about this, I worked as a constitutional lawyer, I worked in private practice, I've worked as a consultant, I've worked at the University of Saskatchewan, I've worked at colleges in the north. And so I had lots of sort of experience to draw from in terms of, is this affecting people in the legal profession? And it definitely is. I had colleagues who were drinking alcohol like athletes drink Gatorade. I had people taking medical leaves around me, but they called them family leaves. If you go to any law society website, you will see when you lose the trust in trust funds, what is actually happening if you lift the veil and look behind there. It's very common that lawyers get divorced more than once. And so there are definitely cracks in the foundation. One of the articles that my students read is an article from Patrick Schlitz, and it's an old article, and they sometimes push back and say this isn't applicable, but it is applicable. And when we went around the room 2 weeks ago, I said, what do you think? It's something like how to be an ethical professional lawyer in an unethical, unprofessional world. And some of the stats that the women were aghast about was the rates of miscarriage among lawyers. That's not something we talk about. That's not something anybody's going to prepare you for, right? And so I have mostly women in my class. I think of 15 students, I probably have 9 women. And they're talking about this and going, like, that's serious business. Well, your body actually knows if it's able to sustain life, right? This is self-preservation. We are actually animals. And so what does this look like? I also have an addiction to books on what makes people tick. That's my thing. That's really, really what I love to do in the world. So when positive psychology started to come out into mainstream culture, I was reading everything I could get my hands on. Today, all I have to do is pick up an issue of Lawyers Weekly, and there's something in there. PTSD, your Ontario Bar Association's the poster child now for let's talk about what's going on with mental health issues. That has got to be a scary place to be, right? You are going to tell people mental health problems are pervasive in our community. What do you do for a living? What are we testing you on in law school is your mental capacity. And so that's frightening. A student came to me and told me that she's going to school in Quebec, and the new legislation in Quebec requires that you disclose any predisposition you have to any mental health issues to the Law Society before you can article and before you can become a member. What is going on there, right? And so these students are like, what if you do have something going on, and what can they do about it? And are they targeting you or watching you, or what's happening with that? We're very protective of this. And so there's so much information that it's pretty easy to find. And I invite you to Google TED Talks and happiness, and you're going to get big hits. There's a standing joke at my school that I'm a TED Talk junkie. And if you can't find me in the evening or in my office, it's because the light's off and I'm watching TED Talks. And it's probably true. So I started bringing these into the classroom, and we started watching some of these TED Talks and what was going on. And how far-reaching is this happiness stuff? Signa said, you know, part of the law and happiness discussion comes from law and economics. Absolutely true. If you look at what's going on, the United Nations is looking at taking on a lens for gross national happiness, right? Bhutan has had an impact on the world in terms of, are we going to keep measuring by domestic product, or are we going to start looking at how the domestic citizenry is going? And so his name is escaping me right now, but John Halliwell is the guy, and he's a Canadian economist who has set up the standards for measuring gross national happiness. And so this can go big or small, okay? And some of my students choose to study that when they're in my class. And some of them choose to go right down the Aristotle route. What is a life well lived, and are we still pursuing that? And this is an institution, after all, of higher learning, so let's talk about what that means. And if the early boys had any impact on us, what are we doing with that theory at this point? And so we've got students that are writing philosophically as well. law and happiness has a whole bunch of directions it can go in, and if you work in the area, you're going to know that there's therapeutic jurisprudence, justice is healing, collaborative law is huge. I don't know if it's as huge in Ontario as it is in Saskatchewan. Law and emotions, another kind of aspect of this. Mindfulness in the law, humanizing the law. There's all kinds of language around this. And so what happens when we step back into the academic field and we look at what's happening with our students? Professor Daykoff and Krieger, who I mentioned earlier, Professor Krieger, have done a lot of research on this. Nancy Levitt is another writer in the area. And every time you pick up something by these people, they refer back to a study that was done in the 70s by Johns Hopkins University. And here's the stat that people kind of go, wow, 109 professions studied. The profession that has major depressive disorders more often than any other profession is law. And so what's going on with that? By the time they start studying law students, they see that general society has a rate, propensity towards a major depressive disorder at the rate of about 9%. So if we took all the first-year students that are coming into Osgoode and we tested them to see what the rates of depression were, major depressive disorders, I've just had a scolding from a psychiatrist who said, I want you to use the proper language. It's not depression, that's a generic catch-all. So I'm trying to stick with the proper language, major depressive disorder. And so it would be about 9%. That's what you would have coming in. By Christmas time, if you've read the article, don't answer, okay? By Christmas time, I want you to tell me what you think the rates of towards a major depressive disorder are for first-year law students. What do you think they are? Take a guess. 50%. 50%? That's a little bit high. Somebody else. It's 30%, okay? By first-year exams, so you recall your first-year exams, right? We all recall our first-year exams. And I often have a student come to me afterwards and say, I was the one throwing up in the bathroom, or my girlfriend was the one throwing up in the bathroom, or my boyfriend is the one that absolutely had a breakdown and had to leave the exam. So that's first year. By April, where are we at? Now we're at our second batch of exams. About 42. So we don't quite make the 50, but about 42. And that continues, okay? So that's crazy. That's huge, and we're not dealing with it. When I told my faculty this, one of my colleagues came to me and said, you can't tell the law students that, they'll quit. And I said, well, I feel a huge obligation to share this information so that we come in prepared and we know what we're dealing with, okay? So let's play a game. One of the things that I do with my students is I say, now who are you when you come in? Because that's what happens, is you forget who you are, right? You start to buy into the, I gotta be on Wall Street or Bay Street, or, we don't have a street in Saskatoon. Broadway Avenue. I got to be one of those lawyers. I've had two students, one student last year and one student this year, that came to me and said, social justice all the way, started the organization of the students and has done amazing stuff in the city of Saskatoon. And she got a job offer at a corporate commercial firm. And she's like, I can't work there. This is against everything I stand for. And what have I done? And what have I done? And what have I done? And how do I say no now? Because am I going to get blackballed if they find out I took a job and then I'm stepping back? And so just the process of the emotional up and down of what have I bought into, who am I? Okay, so here's the thing I do with my students. I want you to think right now, if you have a pen, feel free to write them down, what your values are. The thing about yourself that you value intensely, you won't change. You take it with you everywhere you go. See if you can come up with 3 or 4, okay? I'm not going to ask you what your values are to share with the group, but I'm going to push a bit at this. So think about that for a second. Who are you? Who are you in front of everybody? And I'll tell you, for me, integrity is huge. Okay, that's a big one for me. Having somebody with me that's being integral, that acts with integrity, that makes decisions through integrity. And so when I have a law student come into my office and say, we had a lawyer speak to our class today who represented somebody who was trying to keep their son, and he knew that the client was sexually abusing his son, but he was representing the client, and he represented him anyway, and he won custody of his son, and 6 months later the son was dead. And the student's broken. The student is in tears, and the student is saying, how do you do that? We don't talk about that stuff. We don't tell you how to deal with that stuff, okay? So it's pretty serious. Integrity means everything to me. That's my big one. Okay, so now I've given you some time to think about your values. Now I want you to think about this. Where did that come from? Was it in your family? In your community? Is it something you got from an experience, maybe in elementary school or high school? Who's the mentor for you around that value? Is it in your life today? And here's the one the law students struggled with. Are the values that you've identified in the law school? Are they in the teachers that teach you? Are they in the materials that you read? Are they in the processes that you're starting to understand and learn about? And when you take it another step and you look into the profession that we're all buying into, is it in the profession? Is it a profession that reflects the values that you hold very close? If we had that question and we sort of knew who we were when we came into law school, and we could remind ourselves through law school about those values and attaching to them throughout law school. For example, if you're somebody that's of a certain faith, is that the first thing that went off? I have a student that asked me one time to cancel an entire class because it interfered with her exercise regime. Now, being the law and happiness lady and telling people you need to look after yourself, that was a really hard place for me to be, because I don't want students to take their air mask off to go help somebody else. And so then we get into the discussion about what balance is, right? What is balance, and do we have it? And we'll talk about that again in a minute. So I want you to think about that. And so this is, of course, an ongoing thing. You can think about this wherever you are and think about it in terms of, are your values reflected in your life right now? Okay. Women and minorities leave the profession at a fairly high rate, higher than anybody else. There's studies that show in the United States it's actually third-year associates are where the mass exodus is. When I was at the Canadian Bar Association meeting last week, they told me in Canada it's fifth-year associates, okay? So you can take it for about 5 years. And so why are people leaving? What's going on with this? Major depressive disorders aside, why are people leaving? Now, the people that I know are leaving, they're pretty smart, actually. Got other degrees, musicians, scientists, entrepreneurs. They go on to do other successful things often. Why are people leaving? And I've had a lot of pushback from women who say, I want to say it's because they're canaries in a mine. That's what I want to say. They get it. They get that there's something broken and it might not be healthy for many people to stay in the profession. I get some pushback saying it's because there's no maternity leave, women are still not making the same wages that men are making, there's no room, they're pushed aside for partner tracks and all of that stuff. And that's all true, and it's something that we need to work on, but studies actually show that people will stay not for money. people will stay if you say, okay, you're on the mommy track, what do we need to do for you? Can we set up, how's your daycare situation? Where can you work? How often can you work? What would it feel like to be supported in the firm? If you sat an expectant mother down and said that to her, the chances of keeping her escalate, rather than just saying, we'll give you more money. Okay, so money's not always the answer, but it's that under-cultural discussion. What's the culture of this firm? Are we keeping people because they feel like they're part of it or not? One of the things that's happening with your generation, the younger generation that's coming up, is that they've kind of got some training in, I need some balance, I need holidays, I want to work with flex time. The discussions among sort of the old boys and girls that say, you have to earn your way here. One of the partners of a law firm came to me and said, I phoned him, there was a partners meeting at 9 o'clock at night and he wasn't in the firm anywhere. So I phoned him at home and he said, I could hear his TV on, and he said he was working. And I said, what are you doing? There's a partners meeting. And he said, I haven't seen my girlfriend in 3 weeks. And I wanted to see my dog. So I brought everything home and I'm working at home. And she was like, for sure he's not working. The television's on, his dog and his girlfriend are there. What are the chances he's working? And so if you talk to sort of the 20, 30 something group, they're like, totally he's probably working. And the proof would be in the tasting of the pudding the next day when he shows up and the work is either done or not done. But there's a need for face time in the law firms. And so it's a cultural shift that's happening in terms of what people want to be participating in. Okay, so I'm running out of time. I told you I would get crazy storytelling. Okay, so what's happening when we do have poor health, when you don't look after yourself and put your air mask on first, and you stay at the firm and you're there for 15, 16 hours a day? We are, as a group, in remarkably poor health. Lawyers and law students are much more predisposed to depression, heart disease, alcoholism, illegal drug use, and suicide. There's a gentleman that is teaching about this, and he says suicide is the third leading cause of death for lawyers. Suicide is the third leading cause of death for lawyers. Nobody told us that, right? Nobody told us that. I'm interviewing some doctors at the medical school to say, what are you doing in the medical profession? Maybe we can adapt some of this, because they've got people talking at the medical school. There's mandatory things that the first-year med students have to take. And he said, well, what are you dealing with here? And I said, well, you know, alcoholism and drug abuse among lawyers. And he said, oh, lawyer's liver. And I said, pardon? And he said, lawyer's liver. That's what we call it, because that's like a normal condition when you see a client that's got a problem. Usually it's alcoholism related, which starts in law school, right? Our social events are around alcohol. It's normalized to use alcohol to celebrate things. And so it starts in law school. Martin Seligman out of the United States says, why are lawyers unhappy? And he's the guy that says it's at a rate of about 52%. He says it's because we're pessimists. We have little autonomy, or what he calls low decisional latitude, and we are in a zero-sum game. So those are his terms. What I like to see is what I term as we're pessimists. We have little choice. At the University of Saskatchewan, the first-year law program is they have no choice. They're put in a group. They have all their classes are set out. The times that they have classes are set out. They have no choice in any of that. When you're a first-year associate, you don't get to say, oh, no, thank you, I'm not doing trust law today. I'm hoping just to focus on whatever, the criminal law files. You don't get any say with that. You don't get a say about where your office is going to be and that kind of thing. And the winner-loser thing, right? Litigation is all about winning and losing. I have a little side theory that the negotiation format that's taking over in so many ways is actually how come I'm able to have this discussion with you at all. I think the negotiation has clients in the room where we're not sterilizing all the facts anymore, and they're emotional people. They're the ones that are living through this. And so the emotions are coming out in a forum that they haven't come out in before. And so lawyers are in those rooms, judges are in those rooms. And so we're starting to see that come out. The pessimism thing is interesting. Pessimism isn't good in any other condition. You know, swimmers don't do as well, basketball players don't, they lose more games by a larger point spread. Pessimism isn't good for anybody else, but we're really good at it, okay? We do better in law school if we're pessimists. We often do make law review if we're pessimists, and it's what makes the best lawyer. The best lawyers can poke holes in the other guy's case, in the other girl's case. The best lawyers can say, that can't be right because of this and this and this. But if you interpret it this way, right? When you put your law exams together, did you consider both sides? That's our language. That's actually pessimism. That won't work because, that won't work because. Once you've done it long enough, and so I graduated in 1994, I parent like that. Mom, I had an accident with my car and I have to go deal with SGI and they won't give me my money. What do you mean they won't give you your money? Who did you talk to? Well, what did you say to them? What did they say to you? Did you set up a meeting? Well, how quickly did you go see them? And I parent like that. My husband, I will ask a question to my husband and he will go off on this direction and I'll say, witness, answer the question, please. I'm now adapting, right? And it's what we all do. It's where we end up. And so that's how come home starts to look like work. I'll just go through a couple more things here and then I'll open it up for some questions. Depression and workaholism are fine bedmates, right? You end up working so much and you're overworked, you're exhausted, you're not spending time with your family, you're going through a number of things, and then if a major depressive order comes in, you're going to become dysfunctional in all of those places. And so you can see the path that that's going to take you down. Post-traumatic stress disorder, vicarious trauma, all things that lawyers are suffering from. Lawrence Krieger is somebody that I think you should look up if you're interested in this topic at all. He talks about looking for value in your life outside of yourself, in a hedonic model of when I make partner, when I graduate from law school, when I get married, when we have kids, when I get the new car, when we get the house with the white picket fence, then I'll know I'm successful and happy, as opposed to I need to actually do it right now inside. Sean Acor, and Sean Acor's video, TED Talk, everyone in my family has seen this video at least 3 times. The TED Talk on Sean Acor and happiness, and he does an awesome job about talking about how to get happy. You have to actually look for happiness inside before you're going to find it outside of yourself. So it's actually the opposite model. Okay. If you can find the places in your life where you have choice, where you can see the glass half full, and where you're moving out of that win-lose situation and you're creating option for the people around you, you can start to move into something that we think is going to put you in a happier state of mind. And Martin Siegelman takes it further, and if you go on the website at Pennsylvania University, he wants people to actually know what their strengths are and to start moving towards what their strengths are. And there's a little test that he puts people through. Now, I refer to his work a lot because he actually works with lawyers, but he does a lot of work with military people and showing them how to get healthy after post-traumatic stress disorder. And he has coined a phrase that is called post-traumatic stress growth. And so the good news about falling and crashing and letting go of everything that you think is safe, that you need, is that if you do, and you face what's going on in your life, there's something called post-traumatic stress growth. And so what happens is when you bounce back, you bounce higher than you were before. Because because it's like, I've had a public examination, it wasn't pretty, I'm still here, everything seems to be going okay. I think I can handle this. And so the fear of looking at your own issues starts to dissipate. And so post-traumatic stress growth is something that people are just starting to talk about. And I'll leave you with just a few notes. Nancy Levitt says that if you have some control in your life, you look for where you're connected, and you remember the times in your life where you feel like 3 hours went by and you didn't even notice and it was awesome. So flow, and there's all kinds of science about flow. Then you'll start to find your happy place. Dan Baker, who's a psychiatrist out of the United States who wrote a book called What Happy People Know, says there's 12 points to happiness: love, optimism, courage, a sense of freedom, being proactive, security, well-being, spirituality, altruism, perspective, humor, and purpose. Sam Harris, who's a confirmed atheist, also writes about the benefits of meditation if you're not a spiritual person, and that anybody has access to this. Sort of take some time. There's another study going on right now called the Blue Zones, and it's a study that's going on around the world where they found 4 or 5 communities where they're studying people that live to be 100 years old. And so what does life look like if you live to be 100 years old? Well, what do they got going for them? The common factors of people who live to be about 100 years old: they're physically active, not rigorous exercise, constant movement and activity. They might stand for long periods of time. They might sit on the ground. They garden. They walk. They do housework and yard work. Their diet, a predominantly plant-based diet that they prepare themselves. And if you go into Cree culture, when you prepare food for people, you only think good thoughts when you prepare food for other people, because the thinking is you're putting your negativity into the food if you think bad thoughts. Social constructs that see the elderly have a role, make a contribution, and are connected to everybody else. A spirituality, they say, adds approximately 10 years to the lifespan. Respect for the elderly, wisdom, roles, the connection that they have with young. There's a grandmother effect they talk about. Someone always has your back. And actually the same thing happens in offices. And so if, Stephen Covey talks about the fact if you've got a buddy at work, if there's someone at school or at your office that will say, Joe didn't come in today, what's going on with that? That actually will help with any depression that's showing up. Knowing your role, seeing there's value, having a good outlook, contextualizing the danger and the negativity in your life. So I guess I'm just going to stop with that. I'm going to tell you that there's another side of depression. There are small things that we can all do ourselves right here in this institution, and we can encourage happen, working with our professors, working with each other, and in particular knowing yourself and what your limits are. The breathing thing, at the CBA last week, they had a psychologist come in and talk about what's going on with the breathing. And so if you see yourself, you know, when you're kind of doing the shallow breathing thing and you're tense, and imagine sort of going in to do a public talk, going in to do an exam, and you actually tense up and you're shallow breathing. And so if you could gauge how much oxygen I'm trying to take in, it kind of only comes to here. And if you are shallow breathing, you're maintaining carbon dioxide and you're not bringing oxygen in. And so carbon dioxide, not good. You know, we've got monitors in our homes for this. Instead, we're trying to keep that going in our own lung system. So he talked about what happens when you expand the cavity, when you breathe in deeply, and you're regularly oxygenating your body, what happens. Now, you do this when you're sleeping, right? You shouldn't need a manual about take a deep breath and how important that is for you. but it is hugely important. It affects your immune system, your respiratory system, your circulatory system, your nervous system. It impacts your ability to digest food. It impacts your urinary system, your lymphatics. Your muscles get oxygenated and will work better and more fluidly. It impacts your structure, your physical appearance, reduces wrinkles, in case anybody's looking for that, improves your mental outlook, your emotions, your spiritual well-being. It improves your interpersonal relationships and your sex life. Those are just great reasons to take a deep breath, right? And so I just want you to look for those little ways to make sure your life is going well. I haven't added a whole level of complexity because I'm running out of time, but once you're kind of in the moment of, you've got papers due, you've got job interviews, you've got kids at home, you might have a job you have to go to, those are just a very basic level. If you start adding your partner's dealing with depression or lost their job or has a mental health issue, somebody in your home has a disability, if you start adding those levels into this, there's some bullying going on, you've been sexually assaulted, if you just start adding all of those layers to just a regular routine, you can see it's pretty easy for us to start sort of going down the scale. I'm working with the School of Veterinary Medicine and the medical school at the University of Saskatchewan, and it's really horrible to say, well, my students are worse than your students, right? And so I want to turn it around. I absolutely believe that if I know this information, I can't participate in it. And so I'm on a mission to make sure that students and faculty know that this is hugely important. So thanks for listening very patiently. You all get an A for that. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to give my best stab at an answer. I don't want to claim to have all the answers in any way, but I've done a lot of reading. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering about the difference between, like making a finer distinction between people that go to the corporate jobs versus maybe like the law professors versus people that are working in public interest law. Is there any literature talking about certain differences?
They're starting to look at that right now, right? So lots of the women and minorities that are leaving private practice are going into government and corporate practice, and so they're in-house. And there's more flexibility, there's a more 9 to 5 expectation and that kind of thing. Retention levels are much higher in those areas. And so that's definitely true. One of the things, there's a woman from Alberta that came and spoke to our law students a few weeks ago, and she asked them to choose some values off a sheet that she had and to see if that would resonate with corporate, commercial, or government. And she said sort of, government lawyers might have their values in a different priority list. And so to think about whether or not your values match the work schedule and the lifestyle that you're moving into. And so we're just starting to get that kind of information. Good question. Yes?
I'll ask you a tough one, if that's okay. I think a lot of what you've said is really important, and really in terms of what you're talking about with, checking in with yourself and your values. So a situation I found myself in, and sometimes, I'm pretty comfortable with my own values, but sometimes you will literally have a prof standing in front of a classroom telling you what your values should be. So how can I approach that? How can either I have a conversation with that prof, or what would maybe be something constructive to say to that prof to get them to maybe think that even if they want to share their values, they don't necessarily need to present them like they're the only options out there?
Okay, so that's a really good question, because it's not just going to be professors, right? It's going to be the judge that you're appearing in front of. It's going to be clients. It's going to be people in your law firm, maybe. And so what are the options that are available? So my students are Facebook experts. And if something comes up, they're happy to go, let's talk about this. So the whole question about whether the newly proposed university in British Columbia should be able to produce lawyers or not, given the fact that they're likely not going to be welcoming to a certain segment of society? What do we think about that? And so we're having our own discussion as faculty, and it's actually more engaged and heated than we anticipated it was going to be, Signa will recall. And the students immediately took to Facebook with that and said, like, what is our school saying, and what should they be saying, and what are we saying? And so what are the forums that you have available? So you have to remember what your choices are, okay? Whatever the situation that you're in, what are the options that I have to kind of deal with this? Is there another faculty member that you can go and talk to about it? Because you have to remember that we're not sort of all the same version up there. And so who is going to resonate with you? Professor Sutherland she was a brand new professor when I was a first year student, and she saved me from that very similar experience that you're describing right now. And so it was, once I knew I had a professor that didn't look at me in a certain way, didn't have expectations of anything except who are you and how can you contribute, it changed my experience, right? Now, I went to law school with a woman from New Zealand, and she said when she asks a question and they don't take her seriously and they kind of joke and laugh it off and, oh yeah, we expect the feminists to be doing that, she waits till the laughter dies down and then she asks it again. And then they get uncomfortable and say, well, I don't know if we have time to take that up. And then she asks it again. And so if you're feeling like that in your classroom, you're not alone. If you are going through something in your classroom, you have to know someone else for sure is going through it. So finding ways to connect with people and to find that brave place to go. I actually want to say this. An email. Anybody have any other suggestions for her? That's a good question. We end up in those ugly corners sometimes, right?
And also just part of my concern in that situation isn't so much the person I am sitting here understanding that those values just aren't mine, but the student I know who is sitting next to me who in the midst of certain sorts of recruitment is actively having their values worked upon and being reshaped, right? So I think like that is one of, and I see a couple students here nodding a little bit, right? Like that I think is from a student perspective of trying to get other people more comfortable, being like, these are my values, this is what I'm gonna pursue. It's quite, I guess, a cultural thing to come up against.
It's also very similar to the generational conversations that I've been listening to, right? And so you will start your articles and you will put your time in and you'll work hard and you work more than anybody else, and there's an expectation that you'll work more hours than anybody else because that's what junior associates do. And what you start doing is what you end up doing. It takes 21 days to make a habit. After 3 years of law school, I got you, baby. I so got you. And then you start doing that in the profession. That's a lifestyle. That's not just until, right? Yes, ma'am.
I think Toby's point is really interesting because I think that speaks a lot to a search for something greater than happiness, but to meaning. And I think Viktor Frankl talks a lot about the difference between happiness and how that affects overall satisfaction in life and the search for meaning or finding meaning in things. And that happiness is temporary, it's about drive reduction, it's about, looking for easy things and just sort of being happy in the moment, whereas looking at or searching for meaning is about a bit more than that, and it's also about giving rather than taking.
So, and so Viktor Frankl, right, gets through Jewish concentration camps, and he writes extensively on how do you keep yourself sane while you're going through this, and his own sort of, he's a psychiatrist, I believe, and so he's actually turns this into a bit of a study, and so he's the grandfather of writing in this area. One of my students last year was the head of pro bono, and she wrote a paper on the impact of giving back and doing pro bono work in our community. And you get far more health benefits out of the pro bono work that you do than you get out of the paid work that you do. And so there's all kinds of information available on what that giving back is, right? Okay, some good points raised. Anybody else? Thank you very much for your attention, and letting me share some things that I really care deeply about. And I hope that, like this law school, I know you're doing the Just Balance. You've got the website going, and I got told we're not going to do anything at the University of Saskatchewan. Osgood's got it. We're going to see what they do, and we'll see sort of what's going on. No pressure. And so this is where we're at, right? We're at a place where students are posting. There's a button that says, if you're in crisis. And 2 years ago, I had a student in crisis. She called Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers in Saskatchewan because the students were told they could call. And she was put on hold over and over and over again for 40 minutes. And I mean, she was in crisis. She needed a helpline. And they said, you know, we don't do this for students. You're going to have to go see somebody at the medical school or somewhere. And she was in her home on a Sunday afternoon, suicidal. That's not good help. That's not taking it seriously. Since then, Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers has a new phone system set up. They've got a new person providing service, and the law students are being taken care of. She had to tell that story to make sure that that was what was going to happen. She also went to see a doctor. She was going through a divorce, out of left field, married for 11 years. She's a law student. She's got all her law student stuff on top of all of that. And she says, my husband's leaving me. I didn't anticipate this. And the doctor says, well, what do you want? And she said, well, I want my husband back, clearly, but that's not going to happen. And she says, it could if you got pregnant. Now, how's that for medical advice in 2014? So it's not great, but once we start talking about it, it gets better and better and better. We start to do it really well. So expect, and you're seeing it because I talked to your dean last night, expect there to be a swell of people coming forward going, I got problems, I can't handle this is going on and this is going on. We've never had anywhere to go before, right? We've had nowhere to put this. Once we've got avenues open, we're going to go en masse to them and figure it out. And then I'm never going to go into a vet school and say my law students are worse off than your vet students, right? Because we're going to figure it out. And it's because you're brave enough to talk about it. That's how come. I have a lot of colleagues who say, you and your woo-woo class. I have one colleague in particular that calls it my woo-woo class. And when I got the stat that lawyers, the third leading cause of death for lawyers is suicide, I went and told her and said, woo-woo, you know, we have to deal with this. And a website at a law school, the Australian law schools have some of this. A website at a law school where students don't have to sit at home and figure it out by themselves, and there's numbers and people available at their fingertips, that's a big, big step. So that's all I have to say. I mean, I have lots more to say, but I'll sit down and shut up so you guys can go do your thing. Thank you very much.